Brilliant having you with us. And I think some of you will remember that Phil came and spoke I think when we just started our men's ministry here. I think you might have been our first speaker, actually. Or...
There you go. I remember the samosas.
Yes.
That's what brought me back.
They're still happening. And I'm told that by the end, all the samosa and spring rolls will go, because that's what happens. I was thinking there's a mountain of food there. How are we going to get through it? But we always do. And Phil, actually, you came and spoke at one of our Christmas services as well, a couple of years ago when I first started this. It's great, absolutely brilliant. And the fact that you've come all the way from Birmingham is wonderful. I've got a list of questions, but as Eric said, could you just explain to us missiologist, please?
Yeah, I study mission, Manoj, which basically means I study how people become Christians. And so one of the things that we do as the Evangelical Alliance is we have a unique vantage point in the UK of the UK church and try to help the church be really effective in how to see people encounter Jesus, come to know him and become disciples. And so my job is I study how the processes and pathways by which people understand the knowledge of Jesus, how they become Christians, and so that's what a missiologist is. And so I spend a lot of my time preaching, speaking, reading, researching, and writing around this area of evangelism, missiology, so we can be really good stewards of the resources we have as a church.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I've got a number of questions, and obviously Eric has already given some sort of background information about you, but it'd be great if you could just share a bit more about your background.
Yes, so great to be with you. So my name is Phil. I was born in Sheffield. I've turned 40 this year. I don't know whether you can judge for yourself whether I look older or younger than that. The joke in my household at the moment is about my hair. So for those of us who are follically challenged in the room today, my 10-year-old recently said, "Daddy, why don't you take some of your hair from your legs and put it on your head?" I said, "Thank you very much," and then reminded him that genetics were a terrible thing and that it was probably coming for him soon as well, to enjoy his hair while it lasted. So yes, I'm married to Danielle. We've got 2 boys, Caleb, whose love language is football, very excited about the Champions League final this evening, and Joss, who is 4, whose love language is fighting. Very lively household. I became a Christian when I was 6 years old, had 2 amazing Christian parents who kind of dragged me to church ever since I was a fetus, and then made a decision to follow Jesus when I was 6. I was even more excitable then than I am now, but heard the amazingly good news that Jesus could give us forgiveness for our past, his presence in our present, and hope for the future. And then grew up in Birmingham. Actually, really interestingly, I grew up on a council estate in Birmingham. My dad was senior partner of a law firm, but yet felt really called to live amongst the poor. So where we live is top 2% of deprivation in the country statistically. And my dad felt we could have lived in probably any house in Birmingham. My dad was a really wealthy man. And so grew up in a house in Birmingham, had amazing teenage years, was very kind of blessed really, no real tragedy through my life. Went to university to study law. Key part of my story is then my dad died when I was 21. He was a great follower of Jesus, great example, but that was a real turning point in my life in terms of that second decision moment probably, where I could have either said, "God, stuff you for letting this happen," or "God, we really need you right now." And so a key part of my story is God being with me through that kind of suffering. And then the next kind of major decision moment came when I was diagnosed with the same heart condition that killed my dad. I'm in amazing hands. The NHS is incredible. Had a heart scan a couple of weeks ago. But I think a key part of my story is waking up in the night often going, with your heart pounding, you're not thinking straight, thinking, am I going to die? But knowing God is with me in those moments really makes a difference. And kind of have found real purpose and meaning. I think that's another real key part of my story, and have found that in sharing faith with others, which works itself out both locally in helping lead a church in Birmingham, but also nationally as my role with the Evangelical Alliance. Aside from that, I love football, love sport, love friendship, as we're about to come on to. And I'm at my happiest, I think, sat outside on an evening, probably this time of year, with friends, sat around a fire pit, drinking something nice, laughing. Yeah, those are my happiest moments.
You're an Aston Villa supporter, aren't you?
I am. Do you know what? It's a good
so
time to be an Aston Villa fan at the moment.
So you're doing very well.
That's been very unusual in the last decade, but I'll receive the blessing of being a Villa fan today.
Well, great manager you've got. Absolutely brilliant. Can I just pick up on a couple of things from what you've shared? You said that you came to faith at 6 years old, and I'm just thinking I'm thinking, Jones, your children would fit in that category. I mean, 6 years old is quite young, isn't it? I mean, just unpack. I mean, what happened at that age? Because I think sometimes, in church we often think, well, you're a certain age before you can profess faith in Christ, but obviously not in your case.
I think as if you look at people's journeys of faith, they're often more Peter than they are Paul. So I think if you look at the way in which those two characters in the Bible became Christians, Christian wasn't even a term until halfway through the book of Acts, but in terms of followers of Jesus, Paul has a very dramatic conversion moment on the road to Damascus, complete turnaround, that's hence the phrase Damascus Road experience. Peter, on the other hand, when did he become a follower of Jesus? Was it when he kind of dropped his nets as a fisherman and chose to follow Jesus? Was it when he is reinstated after the resurrection of Jesus on the beach over breakfast? Was it kind of on the day of Pentecost? There's various moments in Peter's journey. And I think probably for most of us, as I look at most people's journeys of faith, there are a series of moments where we kind of continually choose to follow Jesus. And so I think for me, I look back at that moment when I was 6 as the first moment in that series where where someone told me just that God loved me, that I was a sinner and needed Jesus, that he died for me and loved me and rose again so that I could know life in all its fullness now and go to heaven when I died. But then also I needed to make a decision. I think we were all confronted with those decisions throughout life. And so that was my first moment. But I think because of the reality of being a teenager and experiencing lots of different worldviews, you kind of continually make that decision. I remember being at school, encountering friends who were like, you're weird. You're just odd for believing this stuff. And again, you have to decide, am I going to go with my friends or am I going to go with my convictions and family? And I think there were consistent moments through that. Then again at university, when my dad died, probably another big decision moment. And I think I recognized that was probably the first time I was confronted with the amazingly good news of Jesus and thought, that's something I want to live for. And you develop an understanding of that as you go through your life, but that was probably the first moment.
Fascinating. I'm also fascinated about this, that your father, I know you shared this with me before, but I've heard it again, but I should have asked you before, but your father was obviously a wealthy man and you chose to live in an area of poverty, and you've chosen that as well. Can you just unpack that a little? I mean, how did you feel about that as a youngster? Were you happy about it? Were you angry about it? And why have you chosen to do the same now?
I think as a youngster, I didn't know any different in some ways. So I didn't really grasp until I started going to school in a different part of the city and went to my friends' houses and was like, wow, this is slightly bigger than what I'm used to. I think genuinely had no comprehension really growing up until I started seeing the way other people lived. I think what I'd say as a young person, when I began to appreciate the decision my parents had made, I began to think it gave credibility and plausibility to Christianity. Because I thought, if my parents have made this decision, it's not just a lifestyle choice. It really has made a difference on their lives. And I think for me, my brother and my sister are still following Jesus today. One of the pieces of research from the US has found that the reason that many young people walk away from faith is they don't see faith worked out in the reality of their parents or other adults' lives. And I think for me, a big part of one of the reasons I thought this must be real is looking at the sacrifice that my parents had made and realizing what that was, a growing realization as I grew up. I think when you choose to follow Jesus, you say, I will do whatever it takes to follow Jesus. And if God calls you to move to Africa, if God calls you to move to America or wherever, you just say yes. And I think if you are walking with Jesus and spending time with him and he asks you to do something, we don't like to hear this in our kind of Western world, but that Jesus says, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. And God's command to my dad, as he sensed the kind of God calling him, his obedience to that was to live on a council estate. God calls us all to do different things. That's not everybody's call, but that was the specific call on my dad's life. And I feel, I think we need to be careful that we don't turn God into some kind of divine butler or cosmic therapist who kind of just makes our life a little bit better. That, in Galatians, Paul says, I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And therefore, we choose to die and lay down our own agendas and say, God, whatever you have, wherever you call me, I will go. And I think I've appreciated God has a bias towards the poor. That worked itself out in my dad's life, as all of us as Christians are called to serve the poor in one way or another. And for my dad and for our family, that's looked like living on a council estate to love those around us and be part of a church there. That will look very different in everyone's context.
I mean, what I've noted just in the way that you speak, you always say follower of Jesus, don't you? And it's interesting how we identify ourselves as Christians. When people ask me, what am I? I'm a Christian. You say I'm a follower of Jesus. And that speaks to me about, discipleship. It speaks to me about obedience. But it also tells me something about your relationship, because you say I'm a follower of Jesus. What does Jesus mean to you?
Wow, there's a big one for a Saturday morning. I think first of all, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think that the Bible gives us so many different lenses to look at who God is like. A.W. Tozer says the most important thing about us is how we view God.
Yeah.
And of course, when we think about God as our Father, as our Judge, as our friend, as we'll come onto in a moment, as our healer, as our creator. But I think for me, primarily, Jesus is my savior. I recognize deep down I am a broken, sinful human being in need of saving. And so who is Jesus to me? He's the fire in my heart, the steel in my bones. But fundamentally, I am in need of saving. And because of the cross and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, I am saved from my own brokenness, sinfulness, and shame now, but also saved and have the absolute assurance that whenever I die, especially, which is very real for me with a heart condition, whenever I die, I will go to be with Jesus and have that life with him forever. And so all of that means that Jesus is everything to me. And therefore has to be in the first place in my life. And so I exist and want to serve him and see others serve him, because I know the reality and the joy and the good news and the hope that brings me in everyday life.
Yeah. So I haven't even started the questions yet, but we will get there. But I just think you had this deep sense that I needed saving. I share my faith with lots of people, but I mean, how do you communicate to people that they need saving? Because most people don't think they need saving from anything. How do you?
I think first of all, I guess first and foremost, as a missiologist, I can tell you most people become Christians through friendship. And so the way I communicate that people need saving is by being their friend and hoping that and trying to live a life that reflects what it is to be a follower of Jesus. And within that, there are moments where in conversations with people, sometimes those conversations go to a deeper level and you find opportunities to connect parts of your story to their story. And that will involve sometimes talking about our own brokenness, sometimes talking about the world's brokenness. So when we're talking about, for example, in the news right now, the kind of Holly and Phil moment, when we're talking about that, actually, people will have lots of judgments about that. We actually say there's an opportunity to say, actually, we're all broken, aren't we, really? There is, the solution for all of us is that there's got to be a solution for the human condition. And just helping to have kind of conversations like that, where those conversations just go beyond the superficial of how our football team is doing and how we're doing at the weekend. And I think the other part of that is how we share our story. So in terms of how we help people understand that they need Jesus, for me, I've tried many ways to communicate that over the years. The one I found that works the best is being able to share some of my story. So 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. So when you're in relationship with someone for long enough, eventually a conversation comes up about faith. And in those moments, I found nothing better than saying, can I just tell you my story? And I used to think I didn't have a story. But I think as I've reflected, I've realized actually, Jesus really has changed my life. So I do have a bit of a story to tell. And as I've kind of shared that story of the difference Jesus makes in my life, people have gone away, and that's helped people to reflect. And I think also we underestimate the fact that God's already at work in our friends already. So I think people might say they don't see a need for God. I think my experience is at both ends of the socioeconomic spectrum at the moment, whether it's with my university friends or with people in my community, which is often at the other end of that spectrum. People, there is a hunger when you just dig below the surface a little bit. We did some research as the Evangelical Alliance last year, asking questions what their questions were about faith. The number one question was, will everything be okay? I think at the moment in our world, people are asking, is everything going to be okay? And as Christians, we have a beautiful answer to that question.
Absolutely. We have hope. And how do you manage, this heart condition, that you've got? I mean, how is God at work in that situation?
In a couple of ways. I think the first is when I was first diagnosed, there would be moments where I'd wake up in the night and my heart would be pounding, and I'd worry about my family, I'd worry about what was happening to me, and then people have prayed for me in that moment, and I can't tell you what a difference it makes knowing that God is with me in those moments. So someone prayed especially Psalm 23, which is, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It talks about his rod and his staff will comfort me when I walk through the darkest valley. And there have almost been moments where I've been in bed, worrying, full of anxiety. And someone prayed and said, reach up for the staff. There have been actually moments where I've been almost physically to kind of respond in that moment, to kind of in my bed, I was lying down, reaching up to grab the staff of the shepherd over my life. That's made a real difference. But also, my story is that since my dad died 20 years ago, God has been, as he promises in the Bible, to be a father to the fatherless. So for me and my brother and sister, it's been a really tough 20 years in many ways without having a dad. But God's really been with us. He's really comforted us. So even if I died today, God would still be there. He's the same God, and he would still be there for my 2 boys and my wife. How do I know that? Because A, he promises it in the Bible, and B, my lived experience is that he has been there for us as a family in that, and that promise has been true. And I'm in a better place. So I have the absolute assurance that when this body stops breathing, I go to be with Jesus. And that those 2 factors help me live well with this heart condition.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Let's get started, shall we?
Well, I think I've covered some of it, But anyway, you studied law, and we heard from Eric. 2 degrees. So and obviously, you're a very learned man. So you studied law, but you ended up working at Youth for Christ.
Yeah.
So tell us more about that. It'd be nice to know a little bit about your journey from Youth for Christ and the Evangelical Alliance.
Yeah, I think God puts certain passions in our heart, right? So for some people like you, I guess, Manoj, you love pastoring people. You're a great pastor. You love looking after people, discipling people. For me, my greatest passion since I became a Christian as a young boy was to see other people encounter the God that I'd encountered. And so I remember being like 8, 9 years old, wanting to get every single lad in my class to come to church. And we had a boys' brigade at our church, and I invited every single lad in my class and got everyone, apart from this one lad. And then I remember when he left the school, and I was just distraught because I thought I'd missed my opportunity. And then I realized I wasn't normal in that regard. And so I've always wanted people to come to know Jesus. And so so I never really liked spending time with Christians, because I thought, what's the point? They're already in. So as a teenager, as a student, I didn't really spend time with Christians. I thought it was the point, and my character was also wanting to play football and do stuff that Christians didn't do. And so we'd spend a lot of time with not yet Christians. But then one thing I did, because my old youth worker worked for an organization called Youth for Christ, whose job is to communicate the good news of Jesus to teenagers. And so I volunteered for them as a student, running weekends away, where you'd go to an activity centre, like hundreds of young people would be there, and then someone would speak on the Saturday night, preach the gospel, and see like loads of young people become Christians. And I was like, this is amazing. And so as a volunteer on the team, did that. And then my dad died while I was at university, which meant my graduation was delayed for a few months. So in the summer of 2005, began to pray about what God was, began to pray similar prayers to my dad about where are you calling me? What are you asking me to do, God? And then had the real misfortune of meeting a man called Gavin Calver at a wedding, who is now my boss. And you're his boss, Manoj, at the Evangelical Alliance. So he's now the CEO of the EA, but at the time he was working at Youth for Christ. And I met this guy who basically, I'd been praying about my future for about 2 weeks. And he said, I've been hearing stuff about you on weekends away. Would you consider a job at Youth for Christ? And so I was like, what, full time? To see young people become Christians. That sounds amazing. So the interview took place a week after my last exam. I felt really strongly in that period that was what God was calling me to do. The plan was to do it for 3 years and then go back to law. Almost 20 years on, that hasn't quite happened yet. I don't quite get paid as much as I would as a lawyer, but I reckon I have more fun. So yeah, that was the journey.
So you're working for Gavin at Youth for Christ, and now you serve under Gavin at the Evangelical Alliance as well.
I think God calls people to people as well.
Yeah.
So I think mission and ministry and life is a team game.
Yes.
And sometimes that God connects people. And so my friendship with Gav over the years has been, we're very similar-hearted. We want to see people become Christians. And so that friendship has, God by his grace has called us to serve together in a variety of different contexts. So,
That's wonderful. And now you're at the Evangelical Alliance. And I think most people will know what the Evangelical Alliance does, but maybe just briefly what the EA does and why are you passionate about the work of the Evangelical Alliance?
Yeah, so the EA has existed since 1846 to do two really simple things. First of all, we want to see every single person in the United Kingdom come to know Jesus as their Lord and Saviour. So we equip and inspire and unite the church around mission. Second thing, we want to speak into every layer of society with a clear Christian voice. So we speak up at the highest levels of government on issues that really matter to Christians. We're a membership organisation, about 20,000 individual members, 3,000 churches, 600 organisations, and we unite the church around those two things. And as I've said, my role there is helping the church in mission. And so speaking, writing, researching how people become Christians. And as an evangelist, it's a real dream to be with other people who care about that, but also be working so closely with the local church who really are the hope of the world. So yeah.
Wonderful. So you recently wrote The Best of Friends, which is this book over here, which I've actually read, and it's absolutely brilliant, really, really good. And in fact, I gave one copy to Kin as well, and I'll be buying a few copies today as well. So you wrote this book. What is it about friendship that has captivated you?
Yeah. I've got interested in friendship for two reasons. The first is that connection between people becoming Christians and friendship. Then as the Evangelical Alliance, we did some research as to why Christians, the biggest barriers in Christians sharing their faith with their friends. And the reason isn't that they don't feel confident enough, isn't that they're not as equipped as they could be, it's that they don't have enough friends. So 46% of practicing Christians don't know someone well enough, the non-Christian well enough to invite them to church. And so that's a real challenge. So the first reason is almost an impure motive for an interest in friendship. By the way, to say this at this stage, you don't become friends with someone to convert them. We become friends with people because we're created for it. We're made in the image of the relational God. And Jesus' commands are to love God with all we have and to love our neighbour as ourselves. So just to be really clear from the start, you don't become friends with people to convert them. If with my non-Christian mates, if I knew they were never going to become Christians, I would still be their friend till death us do part, if you like. But the second reason was I had a terrible pandemic. So this book, my first book, How to Share Your Faith with Your Friends, was written to help us share our story. And this came out the first week of March 2020, which, if you recall, was the week all the bookshops closed because the pandemic started. It was the worst week in history, I reckon, to launch a book. And I was so discouraged, so disappointed. That was the beginning of my terrible pandemic. And then we found out about a month later that my mum, who'd been battling cancer for about 6 months, that cancer was terminal. And then she went to be with Jesus, sadly, 3 years ago last week. And so amongst that discouragement, disappointment, bereavement, two things got me through: faith and friendship. And in an age of social distancing, I remember who was there for me during that time. You know, our kitchen looked like Clinton's cards. Our living room looked like a florist. We didn't cook a meal for 3 months. We were just so loved by those around us. And I just, as a result, began to fall in love with friendship. And then I began to talk to people and research friendship and discovered that we are in a loneliness epidemic, and just began to become captivated by God's relational wiring of us and the deep need in our society and in our church. I think it's the most important, least talked about relationship. We talk about leadership, marriage, family. They're really important. But we don't talk about friendship very much. And I could find hardly anyone who'd preached on friendship or heard a sermon on friendship or done a small group on friendship. And we assume it just happens naturally. But the reality is all of us can be more effective and take our friendships deeper. And we can exercise those relational muscles. And so I wrote the book, and we're embarking as the EA around this project on friendship because it's just so important and intersects with discipleship and evangelism and unity and leadership, and is so needed at this time.
You know, when I read your book, I think what really struck me was the fact that actually I didn't have that many close friends. You know, if I'm being honest, I'm always around people, and I think I'm quite self-sufficient. I'm very happy. I'm happy in my own company. But it did strike me that there was a lack in my life, you know. And I was thinking to myself, maybe because I'm around people all the time, I feel very satisfied. But then I hear of other people that have got very close friendships, and I think, actually, I'm missing out on something here. Yeah. So why is it, and I'm being honest here, you know, why is it that people like me, or maybe some of you men, I think men probably struggle more in this area. Why do men struggle in this area of friendship?
I think it's first important to say you're not alone. So 1 in 3 men say they have no close friends at all. It's not much better for women. 40% of young adults, who are meant to be the most connected generation in history, say they always or often feel lonely. I think the cultural forces in our world are anti-friendship. And there's a whole chapter in the book where we unpack the pressure on friendship. And I think one of the key facts is that time is like oxygen to friendship. You can't become good friends with someone without spending really quality time with them. And our time is being impacted in lots of different ways that have not been present over the last kind of 100, 200 years. So we are looking at screens more and more. The average someone in the UK looks at their phone every day is over 4 hours a day. We touch our phones almost 3,000 times a day. So screens have an impact. Second is the way in which we're working. So the nature of work has dramatically changed over the last few hundred years. And one of those factors is that primarily a few hundred years ago, we used to work with our bodies more. Now, 40% of people in the UK are what's called knowledge workers, people like you and me who think for a living. And what that means is that at work, we are using the same muscles of our brain that we form relationships with, which means that when we get home, we're exhausted and haven't got that mental and emotional capacity to give to other people. So a really good example of this is my best mate is a builder. So he digs all day for a living. And he would say he also thinks a bit as well, right? but his clients would hope so. But when he gets home, he's like ready for friendship. And I've been on Zoom calls, and I've been writing, and I've been relating, and relationally exhausted. So a lot of people find themselves in that, especially if you've got a long commute, like I imagine many people in Pinner have. That has a huge impact on our ability to form friendships. We're also a lot more geographically mobile. If we move around lots, we're less able to make those connections. We were talking earlier about there's something called the 30-minute rule, which means if you live more than half an hour away from a friend, you're way less likely to want to keep in contact with them. If you know you're moving on in 5 years or less, you're 20 to 25% less likely to get involved in institutions like the church or a sports club because you know you're going to be moving on soon. And all of these factors pile up to put the pressure on our friendships. And time is like oxygen to friendship. I also think we live in a world that subconsciously promotes superficiality over depth. So a lot of us are addicted to our Facebook feed or our Twitter feed, and that encourages very shallow engagement with content. And we can then project that onto our relationships, which means we don't have the tools or the inclination to want to ask really deep questions. And the other impact of kind of social media for many generations has been a kind of tendency to have lots of acquaintances and connections, but very few deep friends. So one of my encouragements in the book is that Jesus had a small circle who he really went deep with. And time and presence and vulnerability are just so important. And so I think one of my encouragements to us all is to think about those around us and don't quantity is no substitute for quality when it comes to friendship. So pursue a few really significant friends who you can really spend a disproportionate amount of time with. So yeah.
I want you to sell it to us more, okay? Because you said, friendship, why people are not having friendships. But, what can we really get out of it?
Yeah.
I'd love to know, you have lots of close friends.
Yeah.
So,
well, not lots. Critically not lost, just a few.
You've got a few, but what do you personally get out of it?
Yeah.
And then I'd love for you to share about, what the Bible has to say about it. Why is God passionate about friendship? So what do you get out of it? And actually, what does the Bible say about it?
Yeah. I think the first thing is it's a real celebration of how good friendship is. So theologically, friendship is just so good for us. 8 times in the creation narrative, God says things are good or very good. But the first thing that is not good is that it's not good for us to be alone. And then Jesus models just how good friendship is for us and his relationship with the disciples. And then he says something absolutely scandalous to his disciples. He says, I have called you friends. And there's no other record of a first century rabbi calling their disciples friends. And so God clearly wants us to understand our relationship with him in many ways, as we've discussed, but also in terms of friendship. So the book really talks about how powerful friendship is for us, not just spiritually, but also physically. So I've dived into the science of friendship, looked at the kind of different ways in which our brains and our bodies react to being around great people. And so scientifically, you will live longer if you have close relationships and don't physically look after yourself than if you are socially isolated and keep yourself in shape. So there's a line in the book that says it really is better to eat kebabs with friends or samosas with friends than salad on your own. Scientifically, we can prove that. It turns out that we are created for relationship and that God rings true in that. So we really celebrate relationship. Then we look at the pressure. But then actually through Jesus, we recognize what it is to be a good friend. How can we give the gift of friendship to other people? And so the book's full of kind of some broad principles of how to do that, but also is intensely practical. Because I think there is an art to making friends. There's an art to building relationship. And so the book's full of practical tips as to what we can do to whatever the state of our friendships, whether you feel you've got brilliant friends already, it will help you with making those even better. Whether you feel like many of my friends who've got lots of acquaintances but very few close friends, it will help deepen those relationships. But also, in this loneliness epidemic that we're in, it also will be able to help you help others build relationships and facilitate some of those relationships that we all need. And then the final thing I would say about the book is that it helps us to be friends with people who are different from us. So I think one of the kind of core things in our society at the moment is we naturally gravitate to people who are like us, and that's okay. That we were created to connect with people who we have a similar interests with. But I think we miss out in the richness of life if we're not also friends with people who are different from us, different backgrounds, stories, ethnicities, ages. So one of the encouragements of the book and one of the practical tips is how do we become friends with people who are different from us and bridge some of those gaps? And that's the heart.
Yeah. Could you just share a bit of insight, we're just a bit about one of your friendships, how that friendship came together, how you fostered that friendship, and what you get out of it?
Yeah, so I guess the most natural one would be to talk about my best friend, Adam. So Adam and I got to know each other at school when we were 12 years old. Interestingly, about 41% of us say that our friends came from school, which is a real challenge, I guess, for those of us as we gradually get older. But so I met my best mate at school. He wasn't a Christian at the time. His dad, we're from very different backgrounds. So his dad was in and out of prison. He had a really challenging childhood. He kind of grew up as a teenager, taking drugs and drinking too much. But he was and still is the most fun person to be around. And he always has this thirst for life and wanting to be alive. And so found that in kind of drink and drugs kind of growing up. Went to school together. We would laugh endlessly together. And then when we were in our early 20s, I was this kind of enthusiastic, squeaky Christian. He was this quite cool kind of guy. So we were an unlikely friendship in some ways. And as a teenager, would often invite him to kind of church and Alpha and stuff. But as a young man in his 20s, he had a profound encounter with Jesus after many years of friendship and became a Christian. And his life was completely turned around, gave up all the kind of drink and drugs, and says now that he was looking for freedom in those things, but since says that he's actually more free than he's ever been. And now he's an amazing, wholehearted follower of Jesus. His life's completely been turned around. He's an amazing pillar in our community. He's sold out for God and has an amazing family. And so what our friendship looks like is try and see each other around once a week. We do, I think digital is not completely wrong. We get opportunity to kind of, constantly text him. I was texting him this morning. And I think what I found with my friendship with Adam is he is someone, he's the builder. He doesn't really do face-to-face friendship. So he and I never go for a drink in a pub or a coffee shop and sit opposite each other and have a kind of, have a conversation like that. Often men, I think, build relationships side by side.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's and do you know this will kill you when you go to parties where there's people stood around. Scientifically, I don't know how this works, but one of the books on friendship found this. Women will often stand face to face. And then you look around, and men are almost always at 120 degrees. Yeah. You'll observe that now. When you go to church tomorrow morning, have a little look around at coffee afterwards. It's terrifying. You watch men side by side. I was even this morning watching you guys. It's all the same. It's men side by side, women face to face. I don't know why. It's a little quirk. It's obviously a generalization, but a little quirk of creation. So with Ads and I, we often run together. He's very physically active. We often weight train together. And I guess what I've done with Ads is I've found activities that we can do together. That doesn't mean we don't have depth of conversation within those moments, but it's just you find ways of kind of of journeying together and doing stuff together. So yeah, so that's what our friendship looks like. I think there are also lots of shared experiences that we've had, and so we've both lost our dad. So I remember profoundly when my dad died, he was at university, he dropped everything. I will never forget, he drove from Aberystwyth in Wales to Birmingham to be with me and just sat with me and kept saying things like, I don't know what to say, I'm rubbish at this. And I just said, what you're doing is perfect, you just need to be there.
Yeah.
That made all the difference. And then a few years later, his dad sadly died, and I had the opportunity to hopefully repay the favor there. And so I think there's that kind of, what our friendship has looked like has been those extreme moments of both grief and joy.
Yes, yeah.
But also that kind of day-to-day being honest with one another. A good healthy dose of challenge as well.
Yeah.
So there've been moments where I've, got too big for my boots or whatever, or I said something inappropriate in a conversation. He's taken me to one side and say, Phil, I just want to challenge you on that. Yeah. And those, for instance, friendship, you need to do that. There are other times where we've hurt each other, and you have to work through some of those difficulties and pain, but that's part of friendship.
How do you do that? I mean, how do you do that?
I
Because
think,
I'm sure some of you got friendships where
yeah,
things were going well and for some reason possibly,
yeah.
in contact. I mean, how do you mend?
Yeah, I think for Adam and I, it's been. He's a very blunt talking builder, which really helps. And so I think you understand in some ways how they respond and how they will react as you get to know someone. I think for Adam and I over the years, it's been just having those honest conversations and putting it all out on the table, and just saying, kind of, when you did this, that, can you see how that affected me? And then being really, I guess, also having a humble posture within that and saying, I'm sorry if I've got things wrong within this, but I just wanted to express how I feel within this. And I think, so we've worked some of those things through.
Yes.
But any meaningful friendship over the years will have highs and lows. And,
Yes, it will be, yeah.
We're not a fairy tale, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
I think what's interesting, that comes across in your particular story with Adam is that obviously you both experience grief, and I suppose what it highlights to me is that we all need one another, don't we, actually? And, what do you do in those situations where, you've got a huge challenge? Have you got somebody that you can pick up the phone to,
Yeah.
And by God's grace, there is one person that I can always contact, about those sort of things. So,
and it's exhausting as well sometimes. So on Tuesday night this week, I went to go and see a friend of mine whose wife and children have just left him. And I spent 2 hours sitting in his now empty house with him, just the two of us, as he poured out his story and wept. And I came back and I felt like I'd been through 10 rounds of boxing. I felt exhausted. But there's a cost to friendship. And now moving forward with that friend, over the coming months, I need to be there for him. And I think the other thing, in our consumeristic, individualistic world, we often ask, what can friendship give me, rather than what is the gift of friendship that I can give? And Jesus' famous statement on friendship, there is no greater love than they that lay their life down for their friends. The unique vantage point we have as Christians is that we give ourselves sacrificially to the other. And we do receive back as well, but our primary posture has to be in friendship. I'm going to give you my friendship, I'm going to give you my time. And there's a sacrifice there that we don't like to talk about necessarily, because it's, are they there for me, and toxic friendship and everything else, but there's a cost.
Yes, yeah. I think your book is very timely, because obviously we've gone through the pandemic, and I think most people, what they missed was, the ability to be in social contact with people. And so I think it's interesting that your book has come out now. I think the church has probably often overlooked the importance of friendship. Maybe tell us a bit about why friendship is important to the church, and how friendship is important in sharing our faith.
Yeah. I think that the first thing, I think the church has a really powerful role to play in being countercultural. And I think the language and narrative of our culture is that you can make it on your own, you don't need anybody else, and we live in this kind of individualistic, consumeristic, entitled world. The antidote to that is a church which says we need each other. And we were created not just for ourselves, but for one another. Life is a team game, not an individual pursuit. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing to say is the reason that the church has such a valuable role to play is sociologically, there are only two places in society that unite people of different ages, backgrounds, stories, and socioeconomic backgrounds. And that is the church and sports clubs. So the church is one of the two institutions left in our world where people come together. And so when we've been talking about friendship and the unique role church has to play, there's only two places in society that do that. So church is wonderful for actually bringing together people of different backgrounds and stories. I think we can't also neglect the beautiful relationship between friendship and evangelism. If you have friends in your life who don't yet know Jesus, the best chance they have of encountering Jesus is probably through you. And so if you haven't got a list of people who you're praying for to come to faith regularly, I'd love you to begin one. That's often how people come to faith. I think the other place is for leaders. So I think in our world, we have really burned out, anxious leaders, and friendship can really play a role in terms of supporting people, encouraging people. If you know church leaders, encourage them and bless them with your time and friendship. But also unity. So unity happens where people are friends. And there are a whole range of differences and challenges that we face as a church at the moment. But when people are friends with one another, a colleague of mine says that friendship's a bit like kind of the strengthening of a bridge. And the stronger that bridge, the more weight it can take. And so where there are big challenges that we face as a world, we need strong bridges between people in terms of unity. So all of that combines that friendship is great news for the church. But also as a church, we need to offer an alternative to the world, which is lonely and fractured. And a sociologist says that we've never been more fractured as a nation. So I think something like a third of people who voted Remain don't know anyone who voted Brexit. A quarter of people who voted for Brexit don't know anyone who voted Remain. We are not friends with people who think differently, look differently to us, except in the church. And I think that's really exciting and compelling as a vision for how we might make a difference in society.
Yes, yeah. I think one of the things that we're seeing in this church is a huge emphasis on community, eating together. Kin over there has brought this great idea to the church about having a pop-up kitchen dinner.
Right.
So we had an African meal recently. I think about 50 odd people came to that. Chinese meal before that. And it's an opportunity to come together as community. And I suppose where I'm going with this is that one of my heart's passions, because I love community, I love people, I love seeing people together, come from an Asian background, is that I think we're at the stage where community is really coming together.
Yeah.
How do we go deeper? For example, there's 20 guys here today. How do we build friendships that are deeper? Like you said, you don't need to have many friends, but you need to maybe have 2 or 3 close friends. How do we go deeper?
Yeah, I think
in our context.
I think the first thing, you've hit the first nail on the head, and that's eating together.
Yeah.
I think going to each other's houses, going out to dinner together. I think there is something about food that is God-given to kind of lubricate the processes by which we kind of go deeper. I think the second thing is think about the kind of questions you ask. So I think that there are kind of, 3 layers of, I observe in conversation as 3 layers of conversation. So when we talk about our football team and when we talk about what we did at the weekend, those are really good things to talk about, but that's kind of the top layer of friendship. The next layer is when we talk about ideas of what's going on. So when we talk about kind of the challenges in our society, when we talk a bit about kind of, Black Lives Matter or Phil and Holly or stuff that's going on in the news and society, and we think about the principles and the ideas, and we begin to unearth some of the values by which we live. That's the kind of second layer of friendship. And the third layer is then when we really begin to kind of get into people's hopes and fears and really begin to understand what the kind of challenges we're facing within that. And so I think would encourage you to think about with your friends, what are the layers of conversation? How can you just gently and naturally and relationally, when you meet someone for the first time, probably not a good opening question to say, what are your hopes and fears for your life? Right? That's not like, the first thing to do is try and find a bit of common ground and see what they're into. But also think about the kind of questions we might ask. So even this morning with John, I said to him, what keeps you busy when you're not here on a Saturday morning? And he said to me, didn't you, John? He said, that's a really good question. And it is. And I nicked it from somebody else. But the kind of questions we ask ourselves, because when you ask someone, what keeps you busy when you're not here, that gives people freedom to say, if they're really into their work, they can talk about what they do as a job. If they're retired, they can talk about their passions. So John talked about his role on the property board, and we got a bit of passion there, Manoj, it was great. Or it gives you opportunity to talk about your hobbies. And you're trying to unearth a bit of that common ground. Which then, so I didn't know anything about a property board, so I said, tell me more about that. And I think those kind of questions that just unearth a bit of passion, I think being really good at asking questions and just developing through those layers of conversation can really help us. So I'd say those 2 things, food's really good, and over that food, think about gradually in relationship, taking those relationships a bit deeper.
Yes.
But you can't do that with everyone. You need some people who you just talk about football with, and that's fine. But you need a few people who you will regularly be speaking about those deeper things of life. And that's how relationship grows.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So you've got an opportunity to invite guys, families into your houses, go out for meals and things like that, which is great. Now, you're passionate. And this is my final question, actually, because I think I want to open up. Let me just have a quick look at the time so that we've got. Yes, we have. That's excellent.
It's about 2 in the afternoon.
Yeah. So no, we've then got a bit of time for questions as well. But you're passionate. You're passionate about your faith. You're passionate about Jesus, and I'm sure lots of non-Christians probably think they're a weird bunch. Why do we always talk about Jesus? Why do you always talk about Jesus? Is the question, and how might we?
Great.
Why do you do that?
Yeah, I think to some extent, the reason we look back to that first conversation, I talk about Jesus because Jesus means everything to me. I think if you kind of cut me in half, before I'm an Aston Villa fan, before I'm a dad, before I'm a husband, before I'm a brother or a son, I'm a follower of Jesus, and that is the number one passion in my life. And we talk about what we're passionate about, right? So if you can't spend too long with someone without really hearing what they're really passionate about. And because Jesus completely changed my life, and because I see the impact on other people, and because I think there's a deep need in our world to be reconnected to God, I talk about it. And I think that's the first reason why I talk about Jesus. I think with my friends, I love them. I really love them. I really love my friends. And if you really love someone, you want them to know Jesus and be passionate about the things that you're passionate about. But also that without Jesus, they're like a sheep without a shepherd. Without Jesus, they don't know real life now, don't have hope for the future, haven't got forgiveness for their past, haven't got a God to walk with them through life. And so with my kind of not yet Christian friends, I'm desperate for them to know Jesus for all those reasons. I think people are really hurting, really struggling deep down. And I know what God brings into all of that mess. I don't know how I would have got through the death of my parents without Jesus. I don't know how I would get through the nights with my heart's pounding without Jesus. I want my friends to know that for that reason. I think in terms of what we can do, there's loads of things. The first thing is to pray. So I pray regularly. I've got about 6 friends at the moment who I'm kind of praying for regularly to come to know Jesus. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is we can be a really good friend. I think one of the things that we underestimate is the better people know us, the more people see Jesus. So if we're the better friend that we are, if we've got Jesus living inside us, if we've got his Holy Spirit making a difference, the better friend we are, the more they get to know us, the more they see Jesus. I think the third thing is we can invite them to stuff. So we can there are moments where I think something like 80% of people in a recent survey said they would come to church if they were invited. So we can invite them to stuff at Christmas. Tonight at our church, we've got a pub quiz. I'll be sat on a table with the friend whose wife's left him and a couple who've been friends with for ages who don't yet know Jesus. It's not a Christian quiz, it's just a quiz. But it's in the church, they'll be hanging out, and that gives you an opportunity for them to build relationships, which is a key part within that. One of the best things we can do for our not yet Christian friends is invite them to meet our Christian friends. Let me tell you why. If I said to you, Manoj, last night I was in my house and an alien came and took me away and took me to his spaceship and introduced me to all of his other alien friends, and we ate alien pizza, and then he dropped me back, and no time had gone past, you'd think I was absolutely bonkers, and rightly so. If you then come to a quiz night at my church tonight, and you're sat on a table, and then someone else says, let me tell you about last night. I was sat at home and this alien came, took me to a spaceship where ate alien pizza and he put me back as if no time had passed. You'd be like, that's really weird. Then if another person says, and we as Christians believe that God became a baby who grew up, who died on a cross, who rose again, somehow became alive again, and now is here and lives within us. To a logical Western mind, that's a pretty implausible story. But when you meet lots of people who really believe that, and it really changes their life, that makes a big difference. And the challenge is, if we're the only Christian that our friends know, they relate to us like we're the person who's had the alien encounter. But if they suddenly meet lots of people and are like, that really helps. So one of the best things we can do for our non-Christian friends is invite them to meet our Christian friends. So that's the third thing. And the final thing is what the Story Bearer book helps us to do, is to be able to share our story. So in those moments, relationally and naturally, if someone says to us, why are you a Christian? Tell me a bit about that. Or when we have an opportunity to say, can I tell you my story? We're ready to say, yeah, let me tell you, following Jesus gives me real purpose. There was a moment a few weeks ago where I prayed for something and this happened. I can't explain it any other way. And we have just lots of little moments where we get to say, this is my story. I think that gives us a good start in how we share our faith.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for all that you've shared. It's been very.
Can I ask for one thing? Can we get one final thing? Could we get 16 bars of some poetry from you? Some spoken word.
I could give you I'll give you a friendship one if you like.
Yeah.
Okay, so you remember this?
Can we do that, Manoj?
We can try. Yeah. Okay. We need friends. We've got music and movies on demand. We've got the world in the palm of our hand. We've got fun trips, internships, play scripts and hair snips, film clips, fish and chips at the touch of our thumb tips. Need to lead or breed or feed your cat? Well, it turns out there's an app for that. But we need friends. We've got computers for a fiver, cars without a driver. We've got louder, further, faster, more, a bigger network than ever before, but we need friends. And friends are amazing. See, friendship is atomic. From the nursing home, to the boardroom, from the coffee shop to the playground, to relational connections that make the world go round. See, we were created to know and be known. It's better to eat kebabs with friends than salad on your own. And yet, we trace in populous places. We're strangers in rooms of familiar faces. We crave deeper meaningfuls, but experience anonymity. We dance superficially around the promise of proximity, and we need friends. And quantity is no substitute for quality. We need 5G, HD, 24-carat friends. Lifelong, fight strong, tag along, forgive all wrong friends. Friends to talk through our problems personal. Friends to call when the cancer's terminal. When it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, your year, you just remember what your old pal said. We get by with a little help from our friends. And look to the one who made friendship possible, whose nail-pierced hands bridged a chasm uncrossable. His scandalous invitation follows the most glorious of amends. There is no greater love than they that lay their life down for their friends. So, celebrate with me the ship most worth sailing, and follow the example of the friend unfailing. May we raise our game and drop our cover, invest our energies in one another. May we still be there when the rain starts to fall, and accept the most important friend request of all, because we need friends.
Phil, I just want to say, well, that applause says it all. We are so grateful because you've given your time. It's the weekend, you could be with your family, you've given your time, you've driven all the way from Birmingham to be with us, to share. And what you've shared with us is just amazing. It's absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much. I'm just going to pray for you if that's all right.
Great.
Yeah. Lord, I just want to thank you for Phil. Thank you for the gift that he is to us, to the church, for his commitment and his passion to serve you and to serve this world, dear Lord. And he's doing your work today because he loves investing in the lives of people. So we are grateful for him, thankful, and we just pray that he would continue to know your blessing, your immeasurable blessing over his ministry, over his family, over the church, Lord, where he worships. Wherever he goes, Lord, would you go with him, and may he know your blessing. And I just bring before you all the men that have gathered here today, Lord. You know what's going on in their lives, and undoubtedly, Lord, you've been speaking to them through all that has been shared today. But as they leave today and as they meditate and reflect, would you bring those things to mind that are really, really important and significant for them? And above all, Lord, my prayer is that they would know that you are their friend, that you are with them through thick and thin, walking this journey of life with them because you love them. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Can I, well, just encourage you. So is it £5 a copy?
Yeah, RRP 10.99.
Yeah.
Amazon currently 9.25, but for you today, a fiver.
Yeah, so can I suggest that do have a look, and if you haven't got any money, don't worry, because I think you're happy for them to just...
Yeah, you can take my details, drop me an email, and I can give you some bank details. So if you haven't got any money, please do take some. And also, if you've got friends who would really appreciate, you can read it together. For friends who appreciate a copy, grab a copy of that. But I've also got my first book about sharing your faith as well.
Yes, yeah, excellent. So Phil will be around. There's plenty of food left. Please make sure all the samosas and spring rolls are gone. The sandwich, I want to see that whole, platter of food gone. and thank you so much to Kin and Paul and Jones. Could we just give them a round of applause, because they've been really helpful today. And finally, the next gathering is a barbecue.
Come on.
Okay, 15th of July, is that right? I think I've sent it out. So the next time we meet, it's for a social gathering. Thank you so much, Phil.